September 19th, 1944. The morning came cold and colorless, the kind of gray that felt like it could swallow sound. The sky hung low over the Eifel hills, dragging fog down into the valleys like a slow-moving tide. Dew clung to every surface, to the ridged armor of the Sherman tank, to the dark mud pooled beneath the treads, to the metal hatch where Lafayette Pool's gloved hands rested, still and waiting. He could feel the cold through the leather. It crept into his bones, mixed with the ache that never left his right shoulder anymore. The old bruise from recoil and shockwave that had followed him through 3 tanks and 83 days of hell. His orders that morning had been simple, almost kind. Stay safe, Pool. That was what the company commander had said. You've done enough. Let the other boys lead this one. There had even been talk, whispered over cigarettes and tin mugs of coffee, that this would be his last mission before heading home. Someone had said War Bonds Tour. Someone else had said Texas Hero. But Poole had heard none of it clearly. All he had heard, all that mattered, was the tone of it. That protective, almost paternal tone that told him people thought his luck had run its course. He stood half out of the turret now, goggles hanging loose around his neck, his breath ghosting white in the dawn. The world was quiet in that way only battlefields could be quiet. Not peace, but the pause between storms. Somewhere beyond the thin wall of fog, another Sherman clanked forward, its treads chewing through wet soil, muffled under canvas and distance. A field radio crackled softly behind him, whispering static and coded chatter that faded in and out like distant thunder. The air smelled of diesel, old cordite, and churned earth. "Hey, Cap," called Baby Richards from below, his voice carrying that same easy southern drawl it always did when he was trying not to sound nervous. "You think this mist'll lift before we hit the line?" Poole didn't answer right away. He just watched his own breath float away, slow and fragile. Somewhere out there, the tree line waited. Dark, unmoving, silent. He thought he saw something shift once. Maybe the fog, maybe not. "I think it'll lift when it's ready," Poole said finally, eyes still fixed ahead. "And when it does, we'll be ready too." Inside the tank, the others were getting into position. Schoolboy Close, the new gunner, all of 20 years old, checking the elevation wheel by habit. Groundhog Ole's replacement, King, was loading the ready racks, his hands trembling just enough to make the brass cartridges click louder than usual. Poole had seen it all before. Fear never left a man. He just learned to carry it differently. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a crumpled pack of Lucky Strikes. 1 cigarette left. He looked at it for a long time before putting it back. Not yet. Not this one. From his perch, the world below looked like a painting smeared with ash. The ruins of Münstereifel lay somewhere beyond those woods. A small German town once known for its half-timbered houses and cobbled streets, now nothing more than rubble and empty windows. 2 months earlier, Poole's battalion had been crossing hedgerows in Normandy. Then it had been open fields in France. Now it was forest and fog. Each step forward brought colder ground, tighter roads, and enemy guns waiting behind every bend. Still, part of him loved it. The rhythm, the clarity. In war, things made sense in a way they never had back home. There were no gray areas. You saw, you acted, you survived. Yet this morning, even that truth felt thin. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the letter in his breast pocket, the one he hadn't opened in 2 weeks. Evelyn's handwriting. He could almost see her face when he closed his eyes. The way she'd laughed that day he left for Fort Sam Houston, pretending not to cry, telling him she'd keep the porch light on no matter how long he was gone. Texas had been hot then, the air thick with dust and cicadas. She had kissed him once and whispered something that the sound of the train whistle had drowned out. He'd never asked her to repeat it. Some words were meant to stay half-heard, like prayers. "Radio's still picking up German chatter," said King from below. "They're moving armor east of town. Sounds like a Panther platoon." Poole blinked, dragging himself back to the present. "That's somebody else's problem today," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. His orders replayed in his mind like a whisper that wouldn't fade. Stay safe. No spearheading today, but safety. That word had no place in Poole's vocabulary anymore. He'd seen too many men die in safe sectors, too many tanks burned to ash while waiting for orders. Safety, he thought, was a lie told by people who needed to believe war could be fair. He climbed down halfway into the turret, resting his hand on the breech of the 76mm gun. It was warm from morning checks. His hand lingered there, as if the machine itself could sense him. "You know what gets me, baby?" he said softly. "What's that, Cap?" "How quiet it always gets before it happens. Before the first shot. Every time Richards didn't reply. The tank hummed softly, engine idling low, a heartbeat made of steel. Somewhere to their right, a crow cawed once, sharp and lonely, before fading into the mist. Poole adjusted his goggles, squinting through the slit in the armor. The landscape ahead shimmered faintly, the fog breaking in patches like torn cloth. Through one gap, he thought he saw the faint line of a road cutting between the trees. The same road their column would take once the order came. For now, they waited. That was war's cruelest demand. To wait, knowing every second was one closer to something irreversible. He could feel it building, the invisible tension that always came before contact. The radio hissed once, then went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He thought about Texas again, about the way dawn there looked different. Soft, wide, clean. You could see forever, the field stretching until the world itself seemed to fade into light. He wondered if Evelyn was awake yet. Maybe she was standing by the window, coffee in hand, thinking about him, maybe even sensing what he couldn't say out loud. That something felt wrong this morning. "Cap, you hear that?" Close's voice came from below, quiet but tense. "Hear what?" Sounded like, I don't know, a click or a tap. Off in the trees, Poole froze. The tank's engine coughed once, sputtered, then steadied again. He leaned out of the hatch, listening. Nothing. Just fog. Just silence. But silence could be the loudest warning of all. He eased himself back inside, motioning for the crew to stay sharp. His eyes met Baby's for a moment. Both men understanding without words. They'd lived too long in this world of seconds and shadows to ignore instinct. Poole pressed the radio handset to his ear. "Recon Red, this is in the Mood 3. Anything moving north of Grid 4? A burst of static. Then a faint voice. Negative, in the Mood. All quiet this sector. Repeat, all..." The transmission cut out mid-sentence. Poole stared at the receiver, a frown creasing his face. He tapped it twice. "Say again, Recon Red." No response. Only the soft hiss of dead air. He set the handset down slowly. "All right," he said, voice steady. "We stay alert. Eyes front. Richards, keep us moving 20 yards up. Slow crawl." The Sherman lurched forward, the sound of its treads muffled by wet soil. Each rotation of the sprockets felt heavier than the last. Fog swirled around them, gray swallowing gray, until even the other tanks in the column were little more than shadows with engines. Inside the turret, King whispered something under his breath. Maybe a prayer, maybe just habit. Schoolboy hummed a few bars of In the Mood before Poole shot him a look that said, "Not today." The boy stopped, embarrassed. The sound died. The mist shifted again, and this time, Poole saw it clearly. Movement. A flicker. Maybe just a branch swaying, maybe the glint of glass. But it was there. Ahead, to the left of the road, just beyond a rise of earth that looked too neat, too deliberate. He leaned forward, raising his binoculars. The lenses fogged for a second, then cleared. Nothing. He blinked. Still nothing. But his gut twisted anyway. "Hold," he said quietly. Richards killed the engine. The world went still. A single bird fluttered out of the trees. Then another. Then the faintest metallic echo, like someone tapping steel with steel. It came from the tree line. Poole's pulse quickened. He reached for the periscope handle, adjusting the view 1 degree at a time. The fog thinned just enough to reveal what might have been the corner of a barrel, low and motionless. A long barrel. "Jesus," he muttered. Panther. He knew that shape anywhere. Broad, sloped, patient. The German cat that had haunted his every mission since Normandy. "Down!" he barked, but even as he spoke, the world erupted. A flash, blinding white, then orange, cut through the fog like lightning. The first shell hit 50 yards short, showering dirt across the Sherman's armor. The second came before the echo of the first had died. Closer, harder, louder, slamming into the front glasses with the force of a train. Inside, metal screamed. The impact threw Poole against the hatch rim, pain exploding through his ribs. "Reverse! Reverse!" he shouted, but the words were drowned out by the roar of the engine, by the ringing in their ears, by the second explosion that tore the morning open. The fog was gone now, replaced by smoke and fire. He tried to grab the radio, but the cable sparked. Dead. His last thought before the light swallowed everything was of Texas. The porch light still burning in the dark. And Evelyn's voice, half heard, lost in the sound of a train. Before there were tanks and tracer rounds and the sound of steel tearing apart the dawn, there was dust. Thick, choking, endless dust that rose from the hardpan earth of East Texas, like smoke from a dying fire. It was the 1930s, the years when the world seemed to crack in half, when the soil itself turned against the men who had trusted it. For the Poole family, the farm outside Odom was more than land. It was inheritance, identity, punishment, and prayer all bound together in one stretch of stubborn red clay. Lafayette Poole was born into that dust. Twin sons, Lafayette and John, delivered by lamplight in a small farmhouse whose boards creaked with every wind. Their father was a farmer who believed in work, not words. Their mother was a woman whose faith ran deeper than the drought. From the day they could walk, the boys were put to work, hauling feed, mending fences, chasing strays that wandered into the cotton rows. Lafayette grew wiry and fast. Where his brother had patience, he had restlessness. He loved motion. The rattle of wagon wheels, the hum of engines from the highway 2 miles off, the way the world seemed to open up when you ran until your lungs burned. On Sunday afternoons, he and John would race their horses along the fence line, hooves pounding against the dry ground, dust trailing behind them like smoke. There were no crowds, no prizes, just two boys trying to outrun the limits of a small life. The Depression left its mark everywhere. Barns half empty, neighbors gone west, windmills turning slower each year. But even then, Lafayette found small joys. The glint of sunlight on engine chrome, the feel of oil on his hands when he helped the local mechanic fix a truck, the thrill of making something broken work again. Machines, unlike people, didn't lie. If you treated them right, they told you the truth in return. He'd sit for hours on the tailgate of an old Ford, staring at the motor with quiet fascination. "You keep it clean. It'll run forever," the mechanic told him once, cigarette hanging from his lips. Poole had nodded, not knowing that those words would someday be the creed he lived by in a world made entirely of machines. By 17, he was built like a fighter, lean muscle, quick reflexes, a square jaw that made him look older than he was. He played football at the local high school, fullback and sometimes linebacker, the kind of player who didn't know how to quit. Coaches talked about his drive. Teachers talked about his temper. "You've got something to prove, son," one of them said after he got into a fight defending his brother. Question is, to who? When the fields failed and money ran thin, he took whatever work he could, hauling lumber, fixing engines, fighting in amateur boxing matches for a few dollars a round. The ring taught him rhythm and pain. The farm had taught him endurance. The ring taught him precision. You don't flinch, you don't hesitate, you hit when the opening comes. And when it does, you make it count. In the summer of 1938, a recruiter came through town. Polished shoes, clean uniform, stories about travel and pay that sounded almost mythical to boys who had never left the county line. Lafayette watched from the back of the crowd, arms crossed, skeptical. The man spoke about duty, pride, adventure. But what caught Poole wasn't the words. It was the photo on the pamphlet. A tank, squat and powerful, moving through a cloud of dust. He didn't sign up that day, not yet, but the image stayed with him. 2 years later, Europe was burning. He'd seen the headlines: Poland, France, London under fire. Radios crackled with Roosevelt's voice, calm and resolute, as if trying to keep the ocean itself from spilling into America. But for most folks in Odom, the war was a story that happened somewhere else. Until December 7th, 1941. He was fixing a tractor in the barn when his father burst in, face pale. "They bombed Pearl Harbor," he said. Lafayette didn't know where Pearl Harbor was, but he knew what it meant. By sunrise the next morning, he was on a bus bound for Fort Sam Houston. He hadn't told anyone, not even Evelyn. She'd been standing on the porch when he left, her hand half raised like she might call him back. But she didn't. Maybe she understood there was no stopping a man once the horizon called him by name. The bus rattled through miles of flat country, passing oil derricks, train yards, and small towns where men were already lining up outside recruitment centers. Poole watched them all, his reflection faint in the window. A farm boy with calloused hands heading toward a world that was about to change him forever. Fort Sam Houston in 1941 was chaos made uniform. The air smelled of sweat, starch, and new beginnings. Recruits shouted cadence until their throats burned. Boots hit dirt in perfect rhythm, and everything that had once made them individuals was scraped away. Poole thrived on it. He liked the order, the purpose, the way discipline felt like control in a life that had never offered much of it. They gave him a rifle first, then a machine gun, then finally, a chance to drive. The first time he gripped the controls of a tank, something clicked. The rumble of the engine, the vibration through the floor, the sense of raw power under his command. He wasn't steering a machine. He was guiding a living thing. In letters home, he told Evelyn that the tanks reminded him of the bulls back on the farm. Stubborn, strong, unpredictable. "You don't fight 'em," he wrote. "You learn how they think." He wasn't a perfect soldier. He talked back, took risks, got written up more than once for unnecessary aggression during training maneuvers. But his superiors couldn't deny his instincts. He could sense ambushes before they happened, hit targets before others had even spotted them. When other recruits hesitated, he acted. Not recklessly, but with the reflex of someone who'd been fighting the world since the day he could walk. In early 1942, he met Evelyn again while on leave. They married in a small ceremony. No band, no church, just a borrowed suit and a handful of family. She wore a blue dress and smiled like the world hadn't yet learned how to break hearts. For a few months, he believed maybe he could have both. Love and duty, home and horizon. Then came orders. Deployment to Camp Beauregard, Louisiana. He kissed her goodbye at the station, promising to write every week. She didn't cry, not until the train pulled away. Through the window, he watched her fade, a single figure in blue against the dust, until the land swallowed her whole. At Beauregard, he met the men who would shape his war. Richards, a driver who'd grown up fixing tractors in Oklahoma. A marksman from Michigan whose voice was so calm it could steady anyone near him. Close, a teenager with bright eyes and the nervous energy of someone who hadn't yet seen what the world could do to innocence. And Boggs, the loader, ex-street kid from Chicago, quick with jokes and quicker with his fists. Together they were a contradiction. Discipline and defiance in equal measure. Poole became their anchor, not because he was the oldest, but because he was the one who never let go of control. Even in training, he treated every drill like the real thing. When others laughed off mistakes, he replayed them in his head until he found out why they happened. "We won't get a second chance out there," he'd tell them. "You screw up once. That's all it takes." The Mojave came next. A wasteland of rock and heat where the Army taught them how to live inside their own endurance. The desert stripped away everything unnecessary: comfort, vanity, illusion. Days stretched under a sky so bright it hurt to look at. Tanks overheated, engines seized, tempers flared. Men fainted from dehydration. Poole didn't. He learned to trust the machine's rhythms, the way it coughed before stalling, the sound of metal cooling after hours in the sun. Every breakdown was a lesson, every repair a rehearsal for survival. At night, the horizon glowed faintly from distant artillery drills. The stars looked sharp enough to cut. He'd lie awake on the sand, cigarette in hand, thinking about Texas, about Evelyn, about his brother, about how far he'd come from the cracked soil of his childhood. Somewhere between exhaustion and resolve, the boy who had raced horses became a man who commanded steel. In March 1943, he was promoted to sergeant. His crew, now inseparable, had earned a reputation for precision under pressure. When a drill officer asked them what they called their tank, Poole had grinned and said, "In the mood." The men laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. For him, it was a reminder of Glenn Miller's song. That restless rhythm that felt like motion, like life refusing to stop. The name would follow him across oceans and through fire. When they shipped out for England later that year, the docks were alive with noise. The clatter of cranes, the wail of foghorns, the heavy scent of salt and oil. As the ship pulled away, the band on deck played "In the Mood," the brass bright against the cold wind. Poole stood at the rail, staring back at the receding coastline. Somewhere beneath the music, he could almost hear Evelyn's voice. He didn't know that it would be 2 years before he saw Texas again. He didn't know that by then, he'd be walking on a leg of steel. He didn't know that the farm boy he once was had already died, and that in his place, something harder, quieter, and infinitely stronger had been born. The dust of Odom, Texas had followed him. Only now it was mixed with gunpowder. By the time the transport ship reached England in early 1944, Lafayette Poole had already changed. He wasn't the same farm boy who'd signed his enlistment papers under the Texas sun 3 years earlier. He'd become quieter, sharper. His instincts tuned to the world around him the way a boxer listens to the rhythm of an opponent's breath. Every motion, every sound carried meaning now. Every vibration in an engine, every change in pitch from a track told him something. It wasn't just soldiers' intuition. It was survival carved into muscle memory. The crossing had been rough. North Atlantic storms slammed against the hull for days at a time. Men vomited in steel corridors while salt water leaked through seams that should have been watertight. Poole barely slept. He spent his nights on deck, face to the wind, listening to the ship's engines hum beneath the storm. Sometimes he'd think of the tanks they carried below. Dozens of Shermans bound for a war waiting across the gray water. And imagine them like sleeping giants, waiting to be woken. When they docked in Liverpool, rain greeted them like an old enemy. The streets were slick and dark, lights dimmed under blackout curtains. Civilians in overcoats moved quickly, heads down, as if war had taught them that looking too long at anyone could be dangerous. Poole and his crew were billeted in a cold barracks outside of town. Every night, they could hear the distant drone of RAF bombers heading south, their engines fading into the clouds. Camp outside Salisbury Plain became their proving ground. This was where America's new armored might was being shaped. Men and machines pushed to their limits in mud and rain. The first thing that hit Poole wasn't the terrain, but the sound. The relentless noise of tanks grinding over wet earth, engines revving, metal clanking, voices shouting through static-filled radios. It was chaos, but it was his kind of chaos. He took charge the moment they rolled their Sherman off the transport. "All right, boys," he said, voice cutting through the drizzle. "This is home now. Treat her like it." The tank, the new M4A1 Sherman with the 75mm gun, gleamed under the rain. Poole ran his hand across the armor like a man checking a horse before a long ride. "She'll save your ass if you respect her," he told the crew. "But she won't forgive you if you don't." Richards, grinning, kicked one of the treads. "Feels like a damn tractor with a bad attitude." Poole smirked. "Good. That's all it takes to win a war." The weeks that followed were mud, sweat, and repetition. Dawn to dusk, they trained, driving, gunning, loading, firing. The British instructors called them the eager Americans. To Poole, it was more than eagerness. It was hunger. They weren't fighting yet, but they could feel war breathing down their necks. Every drill felt like rehearsal for an opening night that could kill them all. He learned every inch of that machine. How to coax the engine through thick mud, how to fire on the move, how to feel for gear changes through vibration instead of sight. He taught his crew the same. "You gotta know what she's saying," he'd tell them. "A tank talks to you." "She just doesn't use words." Schoolboy Close became his shadow, asking questions about everything. Ballistic angles, trajectory, engine timing. The kid had a brain like a sponge. Ole, their gunner, never said much, but when he did, it mattered. His aim was poetry. Quiet, precise, fatal. Boggs, the loader, treated every shell like it was gold. Richards handled the controls like he was born to them, his hands steady no matter the terrain. Together, they became a single organism, steel and flesh moving as one. In February 1944, Poole's tank participated in joint exercises with British armored units. The landscape was nothing but rolling green hills and hedgerows, a deceptive beauty hiding the challenges of what was to come in France. The hedgerows were natural fortresses, dense enough to stop a tank cold. Poole studied them like puzzles, driving his Sherman through practice breaches until he could find a way to break through without exposing their flank. He developed tricks, using the terrain, anticipating ambushes, reading the land as if it were alive. His commanders noticed. "Sergeant Poole," one British major told him after a particularly flawless maneuver, "you don't fight by the book." "No, sir," Poole replied. "The book doesn't bleed." The man just stared at him, then laughed. "Let's hope the Germans can't read it either." That night, back in the barracks, Poole wrote to Evelyn. He told her England was gray, the people kind, the tea terrible. He didn't tell her that every night before sleeping, he could hear artillery echoing across the channel, the sound of someone else's war that was about to become his. Spring came slowly, wet and cold. Rumors spread like fire. Something big was coming. Normandy, maybe. France, for sure. They all knew it, even if no one said it out loud. Training intensified. Live fire drills replaced mock battles. Mistakes became punishable by humiliation or worse. Poole didn't make mistakes. He drove his crew hard, too hard sometimes. One morning, a shell misfired during an exercise. The loader panicked, fumbling the next round. Poole slammed the intercom. "You drop a shell in combat," he barked. "You drop a man's life with it." The kid froze. For a moment, the whole tank went silent except for the hum of the engine. Then Boggs grinned and said, Guess I won't drop another one, Cap. The tension broke, laughter filling the turret. Poole smiled, but it faded fast. He'd seen what panic could do. It killed faster than bullets. By May, the crew could load and fire in under 5 seconds, drive blindfolded across terrain they'd memorized, and coordinate without a word. It wasn't just training anymore. It was transformation. In late May, their Sherman was swapped for a new variant, the M4A176W, armed with the 76mm high-velocity gun. The cannon looked meaner, longer, like it had been built with vengeance in mind. Poole loved it instantly. He christened it In the Mood Too, painting the name in bold white letters along the barrel. "You sure that's not bad luck?" Richards asked. "There's no such thing," Poole replied. "Only bad crews." They laughed, but deep down they knew luck was real. Every soldier did. On June 4th, Poole watched from a cliff near Portsmouth as the sea below filled with ships, an armada stretching to the horizon. Battleships, transports, landing craft, all waiting for orders that would change the course of the war. The air buzzed with tension. No one slept. No one spoke of fear, but it hung over them like the heavy English fog. 2 days later, the invasion began. Poole's unit, 3rd Armored Division, Spearhead, would follow later, once the beaches were secured. But the wait was agony. They listened to the radio transmissions, the coded reports from Omaha, Utah, Gold. The first waves had met hell. The second had clawed through it. By June 25th, it was their turn. When the ships finally ferried them across the channel, the sea was eerily calm. The beaches of Normandy still smoked in the distance. Poole stood on deck, helmet tucked under one arm, eyes fixed on the coastline. The sky was overcast, the air thick with salt and memory. "You ever think about what comes next?" Schoolboy asked, standing beside him. Poole didn't look away. "I think about what comes now." He meant it. The war had stripped away every illusion. The boy who'd once raced horses and dreamed of engines had become something else entirely. A creature forged in diesel and discipline, ready to test everything he'd learned against a world built to destroy him. That night, when they camped inland among the hedgerows, the rain came down hard. Poole sat under the turret, cigarette glowing faintly in the dark. Lightning flashed somewhere beyond the hills, followed by distant thunder that could have been artillery. He thought of Evelyn again, her blue dress, her laughter, the porch light back home. He wondered if she'd still recognize him now. He wasn't sure he recognized himself. A gust of wind blew the smoke from his cigarette across the wet ground, curling into the shape of something ghost-like before disappearing into the dark. The farm boy from Odom was gone. In his place stood a man made of fire, grit, and steel. A man waiting for dawn, for orders, for destiny. And when it came, when the first real shot of his war finally echoed through the French countryside, he would not flinch. He had been forged for this. June 29th, 1944. Normandy was mud and thunder. The kind of mud that swallowed boots whole and clung to tanks like guilt that wouldn't wash off. For weeks after D-Day, the fighting hadn't been about victory. It had been about inches. Every hedgerow, every sunken lane, every patch of green farmland that once looked peaceful on a map had become a fortress. The Germans called them bocage. To the Americans, they were a nightmare stitched into the earth itself. On that morning, the air was thick with rain and cordite. Low clouds pressed against the hills near Villiers-Fossard, muffling the sound of gunfire in a way that made it feel closer, like the sky itself was bleeding noise. Poole sat half out of his turret, goggles smeared with grime, scanning the ridgeline ahead through a haze of smoke. In the mood. Two rumbled forward, engine growling, treads slipping on wet clay. Behind him, other Shermans followed, their antennae swaying like reeds. The 3rd Armored Division had been ordered to push through a small farming village held by remnants of the 2nd Panzer Division. Light resistance, intelligence had said. Poole had learned not to trust that phrase. Light resistance meant you hadn't met it yet. He gripped the periscope handles tight, eyes moving constantly. Richards drove with steady precision, his mouth set in a grim line. Schoolboy Close had the 76mm ready, his finger brushing the trigger like a promise. All was calm as ever behind the sight. Boggs sat beside the shell rack, muttering a quiet prayer as he loaded the first round, armor-piercing fuse set to delay. "All right," Poole said into the intercom, his voice low, steady. "Keep it tight. Watch the flanks. Remember, this ain't the desert. You don't see the enemy until he's already sighted you." They rolled past the ruins of a farmhouse, its walls half standing, a child's wooden toy crushed in the mud outside. Somewhere in the distance, a German MG-42 opened up, the staccato sound slicing through the rain. American infantry dropped low, shouting for covering fire. Poole didn't hesitate. "Target that hedge," he barked. The turret swung, hydraulics whining. "Up," shouted Boggs. "On," called Ole. "Fire!" The 76mm cracked like thunder. The shell punched through the hedge and detonated on the far side. The explosion sent a plume of dirt and smoke into the air. Screams followed. "Hit," said Ole, calm as if reading a weather report. Poole nodded. "Move up 20 yards." They advanced. The engine's roar mixed with the whine of ricochets and the low, mechanical chant of death that filled every battlefield. Through his goggles, Poole caught movement. A half-track emerging from behind a barn, its machine gun flashing. "Traverse left! Half-track! On it!" Close shouted. The turret swung, the gun fired. The half-track vanished in a fireball. Shrapnel clanged against the Sherman's hull. The smell of burning fuel drifted in through the open hatch. Poole exhaled slowly. One fight down. Dozens more ahead. But victory in Normandy wasn't about clean battles or heroic charges. It was about endurance. Hours of mud, smoke, and fear that never left your throat. That night, when the guns finally went quiet, they camped in a field that still stank of explosives. The stars were faint behind the haze. Poole sat on the turret, helmet off, rain dripping from his hair. The silence was worse than the noise. In the dark, he thought of home, of Evelyn's letters, of the porch light she'd promised to keep burning. He reached into his jacket, pulling one from his breast pocket, its edges soft from sweat. He didn't read it, just held it, feeling its weight. The next morning, they moved again. Villiers-Fossard still burned behind them, the church steeple split in half. They were ordered east, toward St. Lo, where the enemy was said to be regrouping. They crossed hedgerows like ghosts, their tank moving in fits and bursts. Every rustle of leaves felt like a sniper's breath. Every bird that took flight made them flinch. The land itself felt hostile. Too quiet, too still. That's when it happened. A flash from the right, bright, quick, surgical. "Panzerfaust!" Richards yelled. The explosion slammed into their side armor, rocking the tank so hard Poole's teeth clacked together. Smoke filled the turret, the acrid sting of burnt insulation biting his lungs. "Damage?" he coughed. "Just paint, Cap," shouted Boggs. "Didn't penetrate." Then hit back. The gun roared. The hedgerow erupted. Bodies fell. The fight lasted minutes. It felt like a lifetime. When it was over, the field was littered with broken branches and burnt steel. Poole climbed out of the hatch, wiping soot from his face. He looked down at the tank. Scorched, dented, but alive. He patted the armor. "You did good, girl," he muttered. That night, rain turned the battlefield into a swamp. The tanks sank to their treads in muck. Men cursed, slipped, laughed. The kind of laughter that came from exhaustion, not joy. Someone passed around a tin of coffee, bitter and cold. Poole didn't drink. He just stared at the horizon, where faint orange light marked another town burning. In the days that followed, they became hunters. Not soldiers following maps, but predators moving through a maze of mud and hedges. Poole learned to read the ground like scripture. The faint tracks of armor in the dirt. The smell of fuel where it shouldn't be. The shimmer of glass that betrayed a hidden gunner. On July 5th, they faced their first panther. It came at dusk. A shadow moving across a ridge, silent until it fired. The shell hit short, throwing dirt across in the Mood 2's hull. "Panther, 3 o'clock, Poole shouted. "Loaded," Boggs yelled. "On! Fire!" The shot hit, glancing off the Panther's frontal plate. "Ricochet," All called out. "Load again." "Up! Fire!" The second shell struck just below the turret ring. The German tank shuddered, smoke seeping from the seams. Its hatch opened. A figure crawled out, burning. No one spoke. Richards shifted gears. They rolled past slowly, the smell of burning oil thick in the air. Poole looked away. He'd learned long ago that victory didn't smell like glory. It smelled like gasoline and cooked metal. Days bled together. Hedgerows, skirmishes, ambushes. They lost in the Mood Eye when artillery hit their position near Le Désert. The explosion flipped the tank on its side, tearing the treads off like paper. Poole's crew bailed out under fire, diving into a ditch. He remembered the sound, the hissing of cooling metal, the low moan of fire eating through fuel lines. Watching a tank die was like watching an animal bleed out. Slow, unwilling, inevitable. When they got their replacement, he didn't hesitate. In the Mood 2. The name went back on the barrel before the paint had dried. The new 76mm was faster, deadlier. Poole treated it like an extension of himself. He stopped calling orders and started calling shots. He could sense targets through instinct now. A flicker in the tree line. The brief gleam of glass before a shell found its mark. By late July, his crew trusted him completely. "You ain't human, Cap," Boggs said once, shaking his head. "You feel the battlefield?" Poole smiled. "I just listen." He wasn't lying. The night they faced a panther in near darkness proved it. The moon was gone, the fog heavy. They were moving through a narrow road lined with trees when he caught something. A faint metallic click, a whisper of motion. "Stop," he said. "Why?" "We got orders to..." "Stop." Seconds later, a shell cut through the air where their turret would have been. The flash lit the trees like lightning. "Traverse right, 30 degrees. Fire on my mark, nothing but silence. Now." The shot hit true. The Panther's explosion rolled through the forest like a heartbeat. No cheers, no celebration. Just breath, sharp, quick, alive. From that moment, the men called him War Daddy. It wasn't about rank. It was about faith. The kind you gave only to someone who had kept you alive more times than you could count. But Poole didn't feel invincible. He'd begun to dream. Of Evelyn, of the farm, of the dust. In those dreams, he'd walk toward the house, but the porch light would always flicker out before he reached it. He'd wake up sweating, the sound of engines in his ears. By August, their advance had turned from slog to momentum. Operation Cobra had broken the German lines. The open fields of France finally stretched before them. The road to hell had opened, and Lafayette Poole was already driving through. By August 1944, France was burning its way back toward freedom. The hedgerows were behind them now, replaced by open fields that rolled out in every direction. Wide, sunlit, and deceptively peaceful. The 3rd Armored Division had broken through at St. Lo and was advancing faster than anyone thought possible. For the first time in months, the tanks could move without crawling. Lafayette Poole stood half out of the turret, goggles pushed up on his helmet, the wind ripping against his face as In the Mood 2 thundered down a narrow country road. Beside the tank, infantry waved and cheered, clinging to half-tracks and jeeps that kicked dust into the morning light. The war, for a moment, almost looked like victory. "Cap?" Richards called from below, voice raised over the engine's roar. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" Poole squinted into the distance. Smoke, dark, rising, and beyond it, the faint silhouettes of retreating German trucks. He grinned. "Let's go get 'em." The command came not through arrogance, but instinct. Poole didn't just chase enemies. He hunted them with surgical precision. Every movement, every engagement had rhythm. A cold, deadly rhythm that made his crew move like clockwork. In less than an hour, they hit the convoy. 2 Panthers, 3 half-tracks, a fuel truck, and a handful of infantry scrambling for cover. Poole's tank roared into range. "A P loaded," Boggs shouted. "On," all confirmed. "Fire!" The 76mm spat flame. The first Panther's turret cracked open like an egg, smoke spewing from the wound. "Hit! Target down! Shift right, take the truck! Up! Fire!" The truck exploded, a pillar of fire twisting skyward. Machine gun fire rattled off their armor. Poole ignored it. "Keep moving." He didn't believe in stopping. Motion was survival. A still tank was a dead tank. By noon, they destroyed every vehicle in the column. Infantry following behind found only wreckage, the kind of destruction that made even veterans stop and stare. Someone later wrote in a report, "Poole's crew moves like a single living creature, fast, decisive, merciless." That day was just one of many. Through the heat of July and August, In the Mood, 2 became a name whispered across the front. A phantom that appeared, struck, and vanished before the Germans could regroup. Villagers waved American flags as they passed. GIs told stories about the Texas tank that could take on anything. Poole didn't care about fame. He cared about keeping his crew alive. But war had its own sense of irony. On August 17th, near Fleurs, they were moving through a small village recently liberated, flags still hanging from windows. The sky was bright and clear, too clear. Poole had seen enough to know what that meant. He looked up. 2 dots in the distance, growing larger. "Those ours?" Richards asked. "Should be," Poole said, though his gut twisted. "Probably recon. P-38S. The twin-boomed fighters roared overhead. Poole waved, then froze. The lead plane banked low. Too low. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "They're diving." A split second later, the world turned white. The first rocket struck the tank behind them, tearing it apart. The shockwave hit In the Mood. 2 like a hammer, rattling teeth, shattering glass. "They're hitting us," Boggs screamed. "Friendly fire." "They think we're Krauts." "Smoke out," Poole shouted, grabbing the periscope. But before they could react, another P-38 came screaming in, sunlight flashing off its canopy. The rockets hit 50 feet ahead, detonating in the road. The blast flipped a jeep and showered their tank with debris. Poole's heart slammed against his ribs. "Get out of here." "Reverse! Go! Go!" Richards jammed the gears, treads grinding. The air was alive with explosions, dirt, and shrapnel. The smell of burning fuel filled the turret. The planes banked away, leaving behind a smoking trail of chaos. Silence returned, broken only by the hiss of coolant leaking from a ruptured line. Boggs sat slumped, his face pale. "Our own damn fly, boys." Poole didn't answer. He stared through the haze at what was left of the road. Craters, flames, twisted metal. He felt something crack inside him that wasn't physical. War wasn't about right or wrong anymore. It was about surviving the next mistake. They lost In the Mood too that day. Burned out. Ruined. The crew climbed out shaken but alive. Poole stood in the smoke, Helmet off, eyes on the wreckage. Someone from command walked up. "We'll get you a new one, Sergeant." He nodded. "Same name." The man blinked. "Again?" "Yeah," Poole said. "Again." In the Mood 3 rolled out a week later. Sleek, fresh, smelling of paint and promise. The name went on the barrel in white, bold letters. His men joked that maybe the third time would break the curse. Poole didn't laugh. They went back into action within days. From that point on, the war blurred into a relentless march. 258 enemy vehicles destroyed in 83 days. Tanks, trucks, armored cars, 88mm guns, all reduced to ash. Poole's crew became a force of nature. Reporters began calling him America's top tank ace. Soldiers started believing he was untouchable. But inside the turret, things were changing. Schoolboy Close had stopped joking. His eyes carried a quiet fatigue. Richard smoked more. All wrote shorter letters home. Even Poole had grown thinner, his jaw tighter, his words slower. The weight of command was eating him alive from the inside out. At night, when the engines cooled and the sky went black, he'd sit on the hull and stare into the distance. The French countryside stretched quiet and endless, full of ghosts. He kept thinking about that P-38 attack, the sound of it, the way the rockets had come down like divine punishment. Maybe it wasn't luck keeping him alive. Maybe it was debt. By September, the division had crossed into Belgium, then into Germany. The war was nearing its end, but for Poole, every mile forward felt heavier. The villagers who greeted them with cheers now looked gaunt. The faces of captured Germans were younger, paler, terrified. Sometimes after a fight, Poole would find himself staring at one, a dead boy in gray, no older than his brother, and he'd feel something twist in his chest. He never spoke about it. Orders kept coming. Push east, cut off retreating units, secure bridges, always forward. Then came the one order that should have saved him. "You've done enough, Poole." No spearheading today. His CO's voice had been almost fatherly, full of gratitude and caution. "You'll be heading home soon." Warbond's tour, stateside. Let someone else take point, Poole had nodded, pretending to agree. But inside, he couldn't stand the thought. The front had become his truth, his purpose. So that morning, September the 19th, 1944, when the fog rolled in over the hills of Münstereifel and he climbed into In the Mood the 3, something in him refused to believe it would be his last ride. He thought about Texas, about the smell of soil after rain, about Evelyn's handwriting, about the porch light. He looked at his men, tired, loyal, unbreakable, and said, "All right, boys, let's make this one count." And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice, calm, quiet, familiar, whispered the truth he'd been avoiding for months. Luck runs out. September 19th, 1944. Münstereifel, Germany. The dawn that morning was pale and cold, the kind that makes your breath look like smoke and your thoughts feel heavy. Fog clung low over the valleys, wrapping the world in a quiet too deep to trust. The hills were damp, the air still, and the mud beneath. In the Mood, Three's treads had the dull shine of morning dew mixed with blood from nights before. Poole had been told not to lead that day. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the front. But orders had a way of fading when habit took over. He was built to move forward, to push, to see before others could. Standing still felt wrong, like waiting for permission to breathe. The column rolled out near first light. In the Mood 3 was in the second position, following another Sherman through a narrow stretch of road bordered by woods. The trees stood black against the fog, motionless, hiding everything and nothing at once. Inside the turret, the crew was quiet. Richards hummed faintly, the same way he did before every mission, a nervous rhythm that sounded almost like In the Mood if you listened hard enough. Boggs checked the shells again, even though he didn't need to. King, their new gunner, just 20, fidgeted with the sight controls, trying not to show how scared he was. Poole said nothing. He just watched the road ahead, gloved hand resting on the hatch rim, eyes tracing the horizon. He'd done this too many times to count, but something about this morning felt heavier, slower, like the air itself was warning him to stop. He didn't. The first shell hit the lead tank. It came out of nowhere. A flash, a scream of steel, a concussion that turned sound into pressure. The tank ahead burst in fire, its turret thrown sideways like a toy. The explosion rolled through the fog, scattering birds and sanity alike. "Panther, front right," Poole shouted, already ducking into the turret. King swung the gun, heart pounding. "Can't see it. Too much smoke. Blind fire. 2 degrees right. Do it." The 76mm barked. The recoil slammed through their bodies. The shell vanished into the fog, followed by silence. Then, a second flash. This one found them. The impact was brutal, a blinding detonation that ripped through the left side of the tank. The world turned white, then red, then nothing but ringing and heat. Poole felt himself lifted, thrown sideways. The smell of burning cordite filled his nose. Someone was screaming. Maybe him, maybe not. "Cap, Cap, we're hit." He tried to move. His leg wouldn't answer. Pain tore through him, sharp and cold all at once. "Get out," he gasped. "Get out now." Richards was already climbing through the driver's hatch, smoke pouring out behind him. King tried to pull Poole up, hands shaking, face blackened with soot. "Go," Poole coughed. "That's an order." King hesitated, eyes wide, boyish even now. Then the second shell struck. It didn't hit them directly. It hit the road, detonating close enough to throw King clear. The blast tore open the hatch and filled the turret with fire. For a moment, the world was nothing but noise. Then, silence. When Poole came to, he was outside, lying in mud. His ears buzzed. The tank was burning behind him, flames crawling along its side like living things. He tried to move, but his right leg was gone from the knee down. He could feel it, the absence, before he even looked. He turned his head. King was lying a few yards away, still, eyes open to the sky. The kid who'd wanted to be brave had gotten his wish, and paid for it. Medics arrived minutes later, dragging Poole onto a stretcher. He didn't remember the morphine, or the bandages, or the shouts. What he remembered was the sound of the tank's engine sputtering its last breaths, as if even the machine didn't want to die without him. When he woke again, he was under white lights. A field hospital. The war sounded distant now, muffled artillery, a voice calling names. His leg was gone, neatly wrapped where it used to be. He felt nothing. Not pain, not anger, just a hollow calm that scared him more than any wound ever could. For the first time since Odom, Texas, Lafayette Poole was still. Recovery was slow, mechanical, humiliating. He was transferred to Paris, then to England, then finally back home. The war rolled on without him. Across the Rhine, through the Ardennes, all the way to Berlin. Men he'd trained, led, and bled with finished what he had started. When he reached Texas, Evelyn met him at the station. She didn't say anything at first. She just held him, tighter than she ever had before. He felt her tears against his neck. "You're home," she whispered. He wanted to believe it. The farm looked smaller now. The silence of it was unbearable. Nights were the worst. Dreams full of fire, of steel, of faces half seen through smoke. Sometimes he'd wake thinking he could still hear the engine idling outside, waiting for orders. He'd reach for his leg before remembering it wasn't there. But war hadn't taken everything. By 1946, Poole had learned to walk again. A prosthetic leg, heavy and awkward, but his all the same. When the Army offered him a chance to re-enlist as an instructor, he didn't hesitate. "I can still fight," he said simply. And he did, in his own way. At Fort Knox, he taught young tankers how to listen to machines the way he had. "You gotta feel it," he'd tell them, tapping a tank's side like a heartbeat. "Every rattle means something. Don't ever stop listening." He became a legend even among recruits who'd never heard his name before. They'd see him walking the yard, the limp, the steel leg, the quiet authority, and whisper, "That's war, Daddy." Years passed. The world changed. His son enlisted during Vietnam. Poole tried to talk him out of it, but the boy had the same look in his eyes that he'd once had. That stubborn light that no father could dim. When the letter came, killed in action, Poole sat on the porch all night, staring at the lamp Evelyn had kept lit since 1941. He never said a word about it, just turned the wick down a little and left it burning. In 1993, nearly 50 years after that morning in Germany, the Army unveiled a new tank training facility at Fort Knox. They named it the Lafayette G Poole Armor Gunnery Range. Poole stood there, older now, gray hair under his cap, surrounded by men who called him hero. When they handed him the plaque, he just nodded and said, "For the crew." He never talked much about the war after that. But sometimes, when reporters asked what it felt like, those 83 days, those 258 kills, that final explosion, he'd pause for a long time before answering. "It wasn't about numbers," he'd say quietly. "It was about the men. You don't win a war alone. You just try to bring your boys home." He died in 1991, before Fury and before the books that would turn him into legend. But even without Hollywood, his story lived. In every tanker who learned his name, in every recruit who stood at Fort Knox and felt the rumble of an engine under their boots. Some called him the greatest tank commander of the war. Others called him lucky. Poole would have laughed at both. He knew the truth. Luck had nothing to do with it. Courage did. The kind that isn't loud. The kind that doesn't boast. The kind that looks at a burning world and says, "Drive forward anyway." The kind that makes a farm boy from Texas become steel. And in the silence that follows, when the last engine dies and the smoke clears, that courage, his courage, is the only thing that remains. Because in war, safety is an illusion, but courage is real.